I'm crying out in this valley, crying out, oh, change me.
My name is Melanie Fields, and this is my wonderful husband, Roy Fields. And we have been married for 6 years, and we met in Florida. I lived most of my life all around the U.S., and he lived his life in Binghamton, New York. And we just met by a supernatural encounter in Florida.
I came from a home that was a broken home, which was divorced, and from the age of 2.5, and I grew up in the church. And the only difference was I didn't know God, but I would go to church. And my mother introduced me to Jesus Christ when I was 8 years old, and I said the prayer. And the only thing is, when I said it to please my mother. But I always knew that there was a voice calling me, that there was somebody bigger than me, somebody larger than me calling me. And as I would go through the church, I would try to please everybody and try to make everybody happy and let them know that I was doing the best I could. And I was quite a wild child, you know. Every night before my mom put me to bed, she'd say, "Honey, one day God's going to use you, but until He does, take this pill." So I was one of those kids that was on Ritalin and all that. And but anyhow, I learned growing up that my life was simply coming to a place where I wasn't happy and satisfied. I knew about Jesus. I heard about God. I had all the information about God, but I didn't know Him personally. And so after being in the church around age 17 and a half, well, actually about age 18 and a half, I walked away from the church and went completely the opposite way and tried to give the world a try, and used to hang out at a bar, and I'd walk in and everybody knew me. And I would get sloppy drunk and fall on the floor, and I'd go up and smoke and just do all kinds of stuff, and was searching for some acceptance and approval in my life. And I realized that I was not getting it, and had a girlfriend living with me. And I had pretty much come to the end of my rope, where I was tired of going to church and I was tired of being in the world. And I remember very clearly, November in 1997, I walked out of my Vestal apartment, walked down the steps, and it was raining out. It was cold. It had just snowed like a week before. Had my shirt off. It was about 9:30, and I screamed up into heaven. And I said, "God," I said, if you don't change something in my life, you can take me out of here, because I don't even want to live anymore." And I had a lot of stuff going for me. You know, I had a good reputation with all the guys around and my buddies and everything. But inside, I was crying out, just crying out for God. And when I came out and lifted my voice up into heaven, I cried out and I said, "God, do it. Do something in my life to change, because I don't want to be like this anymore," where I had no peace at all. And I think some of you can relate with me when what I'm talking about. Some people go to church and they're crying out too. And I realized that it was because God was not in my life. I just knew so much about Him that I didn't know Him. And when I cried out, literally in 2 hours later, I get a phone call from a guy I would never expect a phone call from. And he said, "Roy, go to that book in the Bible, the Revelation." And I said, "Okay." So I open up the Bible, and when I open it up, he said, "Read the title." And that says, "The Revelation of Jesus Christ." And there was more in Revelation that saved me and got me out of my muck and mire situation, of where he basically ministered to me and said, "Roy, do you realize who Christ is inside of you? When you said yes, Lord, to Him, He has come into your heart. He said He would never leave you and never forsake you." Now, what you need to understand is, I've been in the church for years. Okay? I've sang on worship teams and stuff like that, and I was still empty. And he said, "Roy, that life of Jesus, that the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead dwells in you." And I thought to myself, that's amazing. And I've heard that before, but it never meant anything until that night, because I was in desperation, because I was at the place of just completely crying out to God. And you know, when he told me that, he said, "Go after your dreams. Go after what God's given you." He says, "There's so much more life on the other side of this life. And I kid you not, that night I had like a re-salvation experience, or just finally the salvation experience. And I literally, kid you not, from that week later, there was a gentleman that came into town from South Africa. His name's Nick Ketsia with Rain Music. He does a lot of CDs and Hosanna Integrity and stuff. And he came through and did a concert. And I went to that concert, and I'd known Nick 9 years prior to that. And he looked at me, and he said, "Roy, what's the desire of your heart?" And I looked him straight in the face, and I actually grabbed his shirt. And I said, "To get out of New York. I need a change in my life." I said, "I need Jesus Christ more than ever." Even though I had that salvation experience, I was looking for application now. Now I was looking for, what do I do? What's my purpose? Why have I been called to even live on this earth? And he said, okay, I have a studio down in Destin. I'm also involved in church and ministry and everything down south. Let me pray about it. Well, a day later he prayed about it. We agreed, and I went down, which picks up the story of how I met Melanie. I left my girlfriend. I told my girlfriend, "Look, you know I don't love you. You know that we are doing this wrong." And I quit all my drinking. I quit all my smoking, cold turkey, just like that. Just stopped immediately. And I said, "I am done with this life. I'm going to start living for Christ, and I don't care if it's for a church or if it's in the world. I'm just going to live for Jesus." And I went down. I began to have an intimate relationship with him when I went down to South Florida, or down to Florida in the South. And I mean, God provided amazing things. And we pulled my car on a U-Haul, and I packed it up, and I left everything up here to go down south. It doesn't mean I didn't have some of my old ways when I came down, but I was on to a new life and a new journey, and it was really to follow after God. And I tell you what, when I got down to Florida, I thought I'd have to sit down for 6 months because of smoking and drinking and doing all this other stuff, and that didn't happen at all. He loved me the way I was. He loved me where I was at. And it ministered to me that he would allow me to come back up, and it was like the prodigal son that ran away, and he comes back to his father, and here he had squandered all the money and everything, and when he comes back, his father's like just overwhelmed and just excited and says, "Please, let's bring my son up here, and let's put him a new robe and get him a new ring, and let's buy him a pizza," and I mean, that ministered to me, and so I'm excited now. I've got this new life after God. Nothing's really changed except for the fact that I've moved from New York to another place. But see, my heart changed. And I was very hungry for the things of God. Extremely hungry for the things of God. To the point where I didn't want to do anything else. And, excuse me. I just remember I went to that church down there in Grace Tabernacle in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. And I was on the worship team. I played music and everything. I was one of the musicians. They gave me a key to come into the church anytime I wanted to. And they had this beautiful grand piano there. And I'm not a classical kind of player. I mean, I'm kind of a rock player and stuff. But boy, I can get to the intimate place where I just know it's me and God. And we would get done with the service, and it was okay. And everybody would leave, and I'd keep the key, and I'd lock up the door, and I'd go into the sanctuary, dim all the lights down, and I would just play before the Lord. Just me and God. And I got on that piano, and I began to play, and I would pour my heart out to God. And I would just tell Him everything that He has done for me. I thank you. I tell Him how wonderful He is, even though I've been through all this junk in my life. And man, it was just me and God at that piano. And we would just sit there, I would just sit there, just me and God, and I would play. And I mean, the presence of the Lord would just come into place. And I would feel acceptance. I'm talking about a tangible presence. Not just oh, hey, that's a great song. I felt a tangible presence of the Lord to one point where I looked over to my right and I got so scared because it felt like an angel had walked into the room. And I looked down. I know this is going to sound a little spooky to some of y'all, and you probably think I'm weird or something, but I'm not. Well, I am, but I'm not that weird. I looked down and I saw a bronze pair of feet. And I don't know if they were Jesus' feet. I don't know if they were an angel's feet. I don't know if it was representative from God. All I know is it was definitely somebody from the Lord that was sent into that place. And I just knew from that moment that God was with me, and that wherever I went, things would change.